Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode, Party Monster, is, well, it's fun. So essentially the setup for this episode is that, not Enrique, to spite Claire, because they get into an argument at one point, throws a massive rager at her house. And that is just where the titular name of the episode comes in. It is, he throws a massive party and it gets out of hand. So that is essentially that's essentially what it is. But also there is more of a side story where Jim and Toby are kind of separate from Claire in the episode and are trying to figure out an idea to get the Inferno off Strickler's finger. And sure enough, that is exactly how the episode starts, with the trio of them meeting up in Claire's bedroom, brainstorming ideas on how to get the Inferno away from Strickler. And they actually animate out all the different various scenarios that they think up to try and see if they how they actually get the Inferno away from him. First and foremost, they decide to just sneak in with Claire's shadow staff when Strickler's asleep, and then just take the Inferno off his finger. But they quickly but Toby points out the obvious problem with that, and that they don't even know if changelings sleep, which is an interesting thing that never really came up. But yeah, when they realize that that's also a thing they'll need to think of, though they also consider spiking his coffee with cold medicine so he actually falls asleep, and then sneaking in. But then Claire points out that the last time they went to his office, it was guarded. The last time somebody went to his office, it was guarded. Even though she wasn't there admittedly, but she probably picked it up from somebody else. But somebody probably told her that it was guarded. But they do point out that it was guarded, that maybe he has a minion guarding it. And sure enough, they imagine that there's just Frogwell with a crossbow. It's essentially what they imagined. So yeah, third time around, they decide to actually, imagine, planning for the minion and knocking him out. But then in the fantasy itself, the things get a little bit out of hand because they kind of acknowledge that it's a fantasy, but they do point out that Strickler's waking up. That Strickler's waking up, even though Jim points out that none of this is real. It's all in their head, and they of course try to swipe the Inferno from him while he's waking up. But at which point Toby tells Jim to cut off Strickler's hand so they can get the Inferno. But then Toby and Jim both remember that because of Engerrod's binding spell, they can't do that. That would just cause Barbara's hand to fall off, just inexplicably, without any sort of explanation as to why. So of course they decide to actually call it a day, pointing out that obviously they need to figure out that they're just going to need to continue to work it through various ideas and try and figure out if there's some sort of solution to actually figure out what they're supposed to do. And of course Claire points out that they kind of have no time to do it, because they point out that next time Engerrod sees Jim, he's either expecting the Inferno or he's expecting to just take Jim's head off its shoulders. So yeah, he's either way they point out that they're going to have to figure out a solution. So for that reason, but for any case, Jim points out that they better call it a day, but also points out that even if they can't find a normal solution, they literally can just go to Troll Market and see if they can figure out some sort of solution on their own. At which point Toby and Jim leave to go to Troll Market and asks Claire if she wants to come with. And Claire points out that she can't. She's meeting with Darcy and Mary and just hanging out with them today. That is the plan. That is her plan, and that is what she wanted to do. And of course she points out that she's mostly doing it to keep up appearances, because she doesn't want people suspecting that there's something weird about her, and that she's using her. That she's leading a double life as a troll hunter, so she's just kind of keeping up appearances about it. And of course, Toby and Claire both respect that and decide to go to Troll Market and leave her alone. However, as we find out, when she gets into Troll Market, she finds out that when they leave, Claire goes into the kitchen and discovers that not Enrique has essentially made a mess of the kitchen, and also because her parents aren't home, there's nobody there to yell at him. So and of course she points that out to him, pointing out that just because their parents aren't home, quote unquote, but because in not Enrique's case they aren't actually his parents, but But he points out that he should still stay in his room and stay in his crib. But he points out that he don't want to, and decide to come downstairs to make a snack, and asks her if he wants to try out the new recipe he's making. But of course, it's at this point where Claire just kind of gets mad at Enrique, pointing out the obvious mess he's made, and also points out that obviously, because he's acting like because they don't know, because obviously the thing is, Claire's parents don't know that their toddler has been swapped out with a changeling, and because of that, she points out that she gets blamed for pretty much everything he does, regardless of whether or not it's her fault. And of course she has to take the rap for him every single time, which is not great or ideal. And that is something that the series hasn't really brought up yet. Just the implications that there is a troll living in her house and making messes that she then has to clean up and constantly fix. That is something that the episode finally brings up and points out that, yeah, it's probably a thing. She probably has to deal with that a lot. But of course, Enrique points out that, hey, first and foremost, he's far older than her, and points out that he doesn't really need a babysitter because he's older than her by a lot. He's like hundreds of years old, because he's a troll. But also points out that obviously he's taking a big risk as well by siding with the good people, because obviously he's siding with the good guys, which of course causes problems because the other changelings don't like him very much because of that. Obviously he kind of defected, so they're kind of mad at him the bad guys are kind of mad at him for doing that. But of course it's at this point where Claire insists that that's not fair, and that she just wishes she had her regular brother back, and then proceeds to pick him up by the scruff and makes him go to his room, because pointing out that she has company over, and she needs him to go baby up before anything happens. And she then proceeds to place him in his crib, but at which point they proceed to have a little bit of a spat where he gets mad at her and tells her that if she's going to continue manhandling him by his scruff, that he's not going to let her see her brother anymore, and that causes her to get mad. They start screaming at each other, and then she goes downstairs, and in an accident she kind of breaks the picture of her and Enrique, and does declare that she hates Enrique because of what's going on. So she then proceeds to place the portrait back, to just kind of leave the portrait on there, and promises and decides to clean it up later. At which point Enrique, also angry at Claire, decides that this is where it comes in. He starts calling some of his troll friends and is prepared to throw a party. That is what his plan is. But of course he starts calling various people around Troll Market and tells them that, hey, there's a party, it's still on, you guys gotta come to this. And tells him that he doesn't care who, and tells the person, namely by Dwella, because he's one of the first people he calls, but he tells her that he doesn't really care who knows, and she just, and presumably word of mouth just kind of spreads that there's gonna be a rager at Claire's place, but after sundown. At which point Toby and Jim, we get to see them again. Toby and Jim, they go to Rock Guts to see if there's some sort of magical solution to solve their problems and get them Infernocopula away from Strickler. So they obviously knock on Rotten Gut's door and asks Rotten Gut if they in fact have some sort of magical solution that'll enable them to remove the ring from Strickler's finger, and tell them that there is a ring if they have a ring remover spell of some sort. And of course they point out that they start looking around to their various things to see what they've got. And what we find out is that they're not particularly helpful, and Blinky eventually comes in to explain this. But Blinky eventually comes in and explains the obvious problem that Rotten Gut, they have pretty much anything you would need to solve any sort of problem. But as Blinky explains, it's only if you know exactly what you're looking for and are able to ask for it directly. Case in point, Rotten Gut are just kind of fumbling around behind their door, looking through the various things to see if they can find a ring remover spell. But we find out that they actually have a ring remover spell. At which point they find a spell that enables them to swap each other's feet, and they do that and mess around with that for a bit. And eventually, Blinky points out that it's probably best that they leave and find their solution elsewhere, at which point he decides to bring them that hope is not lost, and that he actually knows a place where he can bring them. At which point, he proceeds to bring them to his library, which of course is piled high, stacked full of books, and Toby is visibly upset about the fact that they have to figure out how to read books. How to read, and he does point that, and of course they point out, and of course it's this point where Blinky points out that this is actually that his brother actually spent a lifetime cataloging various things. He cataloging troll lore, scrolls, tomes, and a bunch of other things in a personal library, and of course he points out that if there's anything that they need to know, it will probably be in among Dictacious' things. And we do find out that his name is Dictacious. But of course, when Toby and Jim point out that they didn't know he had a brother, he responds that he quote unquote had a brother. As he and we will get to that, but he responds that he did have a brother named Dictacious Maximus Galadriel. And what we find out is that Dictacious presumably passed away at some point. Presumably. Again, I will bring that up, but I bring that becomes important later. But yeah, Dictacious is Blinky explains that that Dictacious was presumed dead, and that his novels, books, memoirs, and all the other things that he's collected over the years are pretty much the only thing that Blinky has left of him, and points out that he misses him dearly. Which of course causes Jim to admit he's sorry and that he didn't know, and does try to cover Blinky, but then Blinky kind of trails off on that when he hears somebody else monkeying around in his library, and sure enough we see Arg behind a huge wall of books, and what we find out, and he closes the book before anybody can actually see what he's looking up, but what we find out is he's actually looking into possible cures for his creeper sun poison. He's looking, and before anybody can get close, he proceeds to close the book and tuck it under his arm. And when Blinky asks him if everything's all right, and is a little bit curious as to why Arg is in his library, Arg points out that he was just leaving, and then proceeds to close up the book, tuck it under his arm, and then proceeds to just hastily leave before anybody can see what the book actually was. And of course we find out. Toby is a little confused as to what exactly was going on with all of that, but Blinky explains that he's known Arg for a long time, and goes on to explain how obviously the entire issue with how obviously Arg is very complex underneath the surface, despite being a man of few words and also not being very good with those words to begin with. But does point out that in time he will eventually open up to them and will tell them whatever's bothering him, and that he probably, but in the meantime that he probably just has a lot on his mind. Although Blinky does again note that Arg has been a little bit distant as of late, so he's not entirely sure what's bothering him. He knows something definitely is bothering him, but he's not 100% on what it is, but just knows that Arg probably has other things on his plate that he's not telling anybody about. But in case with that, they then proceed to start digging in and start looking at all the various piles of books to figure out what's what. Meanwhile, Claire is getting ready for her get together with Darcy and Mary, and she's prepared homemade guacamole like she always does for people who come to hang out over at her house. When she discovers Not Enrique is just in the living room and is not babied up yet, and she does to know why he's downstairs, pointing out that Mary and Darcy will be over at any minute, and that he needs to baby up and just kind of get out of her hair for a bit, but he does point out that he doesn't really want to that he's not planning to stay in his room anytime soon, and of course she insists that she actually just goes and makes himself scarce. At which point, he hears a doorbell ring, and then proceeds to go to the front door, expecting Darcy and Mary, but then discovers that there's nobody at the front door. At which point, Not Enrique reveals that the people that she heard are actually at the back door. He proceeds to open the back door and just lets a bunch of trolls in, and of all varying shapes and sizes, might I mention, all various places, and of course Claire is visibly upset, pointing out that obviously he doesn't have permission to throw a party. He should not have thrown a party, but he points out that he didn't really ask for her permission, and then proceeds to ask her when her friends are coming over. And of course, that winds up becoming the conflict of the episode, where Claire quickly realizes that Darcy and Mary are coming over, and she needs to let them know that there's something going on, and something came up, and that they can't hang out today. And of course, she immediately calls them, but she gives a vague answer, although they can obviously hear all the music and raving in the background, and do wonder if she's actually throwing a party without them. And although Claire insists that she's not actually throwing a party, that there's no party, and that they just can't come over to hang out today. Although her phone is almost eaten by a troll as she's giving the phone call, and but she just insists that they don't come over, and then just hangs up, and that winds up confusing both of them, who point out that Claire has never hung up on them before, and decide to go over to her house to figure out what's wrong. It's at this point where as we find out, as quite a while has passed since Toby and Jim and Blinky have sat down to start reading books, and they quickly discover that they're not really finding much of anything. But obviously Jim's been reading through book by book with his Trollhunter amulet to try and figure out what exactly it is that they need to know to actually find the information they're looking for. Well, Toby admits that he can't read Troll, so he's been mostly looking at the pictures. And of course he's pointing out that it's just been very slow. They haven't been able to find anything. Meanwhile, Blinky is kind of sort of in and out. He's struggling a little bit to keep up with them. And of course Blinky professed that because he only has two eyes, now because he's human, he notices that it wore him out quite a bit faster than he normally would, and that his aptitude for learning new things and gathering more knowledge is sort of waning a little bit. And of course Jim asks if he's feeling all right. I'm pointing out that he looks like he's half asleep, and of course what we find out is that actually mainly because of a misunderstanding and a misconception of how humans work. But Blinky unintentionally reveals that he hasn't been getting enough sleep, revealing that he's been getting 8 minutes rather than the 8 hours that you're supposed to get when you sleep. And of course, Jim tries to point out that hasn't been getting enough sleep. But by that point, Blinky has long since passed out and is just kind of zonked out for most of the rest of the episode. And of course they quickly figure out that they quickly figure out that they're not going to be able to do this on their own, and do point out that with the two of them it's going to be a lot more difficult. At which point Toby tries to look through another series of books on top of a bookshelf, pointing out that he really can't take much more of this. And it's at this point where as he's looking through the thing, he winds up taking a random book off the shelf that he points out he's not entirely sure if it'll help or not, but he decides to just keep going through it. But of course, at this point where Jim does look at the page that he landed on, and does realize that it actually can help them in a way. At which point he pulls out his amulet, places it in the book so that Toby can read it. And what we find out is that it's actually a book for a potion called Elixlore. And what we find out is that it causes whoever drinks it to become voracious for knowledge, as it were. And conclude that it may not be able to help them get the Infernocopula off Strickler's finger, but it should expedite the process and enable them to actually, learn more knowledge a lot faster, and get what they need a lot faster. And of course, with that, they then proceed to go over to Rotten Guts, pay them with Argyle socks as per usual, and then we finally see the potion, and what we find out is that the potion is actually designed to we'll find out a bit what the potion is, but of course it's at this point where Toby just takes a big swig of it, and he of course comments on some tummy troubles, but also points out that it tastes a bit moldy, and points out they probably shouldn't have drink it. And when Jim goes to drink it, he discovers that Toby has effectively drank all of it. And what we find out is that he was only supposed to drink a drop of it, but does proceed to wonder, and after yelling at Toby for drinking pretty much the whole thing by himself, he then wonders how Toby is feeling, and Toby points out that he feels alright, but that he feels alright, but he also feels a little bit queasy. But it's at this point where we find out what the potion actually does, and what we find out is that it literally makes a person hungry for knowledge. Case in point, as Toby is kind of commenting on his tummy troubles, all of the several pages of worth of notes just fly off out of one of Blinky's books and into Toby's mouth, and he winds up literally eating the knowledge, and with that also winds up randomly blurting out a random nugget of information about past Trollhunters. And of course, it's at this point where Jim, realizing that the potion is in fact working, brings him another book and asks him to eat more. And sure enough, he sucks in more knowledge into his mouth, and then proceeds to produce a nugget about Madrox the Many, about how he defeated his own narcissism as one of his greatest adversaries. And of course, Jim, realizing that they can quickly figure out what exactly it is they need to do, and figure out what the information that they need to go for. It effectively enables Toby to just keep eating more books. Meanwhile, Claire is upset, is still visibly upset and trying to deal with the whole situation regarding the trolls in her house and that are throwing an out of control party. And she continues to try and find Don Enrique and get him to stop it, but she keeps running into various trolls who are all drinking something called glug, and what we find out is that's made from a quagglewump troll that's just sitting in a bathtub, soaking in her own filth, and that's what creates glug. But of course they're chugging it, and they're chugging it from a bathtub. They're drinking it dunking a tankers into a bathtub and drinking out of it. That's essentially what glug is. I'll explain that. Claire is continuing to try and get Don Enrique to stop throwing the party, and does insist that they stop, and that it's getting out of control. But he points out that it's just getting good. But she also points out that it's not really his place to say, pointing out that obviously Mary and Darcy are probably going to be on their way over regardless. And then points out that if they actually wind up showing up at the house, that it could be a big problem, because as she points out, Mary is internet famous. She has 30,000 followers on numerous websites, and points out that if Mary were to say take a picture of trolls hanging out at Claire's house, it would cause pretty much news-wide scandals and a whole bunch of other things. And of course she is famous enough that would definitely happen. It's plausible that it could happen. So and of course she does point out, but of course Don Enrique just kind of rolls his eyes at her, and it's at this point where Arg winds up showing up at the house. And she's just happy to see a familiar face, pointing out that Arg could definitely help her get the party under control. And but Arg just kind of brushes her off and immediately makes a beeline to the glug bathtub, and proceeds to start chugging it. And this of course causes Claire to realize that that even Arg isn't going to be able to help her. At which point Don Enrique tells her that it's fine, and that clearly Arg is just blowing off some steam, because pointing out that even a big bug guy like him probably has a lot on his plate. And sure enough, we find out that we do see him blowing off a lot of steam. And what we find out is that of course she points out that, and of course what we find out is that Arg is in fact still. Well, we actually see his creeper sun infection, and what we find out is that it has spread quite a bit through his armpit, and of course we see him he celebrates his chug, but then somebody notes that somebody from the party, if one of the trolls notes that he seems to have some sort of rash, and and points out that it looks pretty bad, but Arg not only denies that there's anything wrong, but proceeds to grab the guy and threatens him with violence if he tells anybody, which of course he realizes is very out of character for himself, and he proceeds to put the guy down and tells him that he was sorry before going back to the party. And Not Enrique and Claire just see all of this and quickly point out that that's a kind of a problem, and points out that clearly, and Not Enrique comments that clearly Arg needed to blow off more steam than he thought. At which point Claire, realizing that the party is going to just get out of control without any sort of supervision or help, then decides to call Jim. And she immediately calls Jim and tells him what's up. But before she can even start, Jim proceeds to tell her that the whole situation with Toby and his Elix lore thing has gotten completely out of control, because effectively what's happened is, because Toby drank more than what was prescribed of the Elix lore, he has started sucking in pretty much an entire tornado worth of knowledge, and is just becoming a knowledge god, as Jim puts it. So, yeah, he's just kind of spouting off random bits of knowledge and bits of trivia about troll lore and a bunch of other things, and he continues to insist just kind of insist that he needs more knowledge. And of course, Jim pointing out that the situation has obviously gotten very out of hand. He points out that whatever it is, that they'll deal with it later. But it's of course at this point where Claire points out that she obviously needs him at her house, pointing out that Not Enrique has thrown a massive rager, and all making matters worse. Mary and Darcy are on their way over, even though she told them not to, because she figures that Mary and Darcy will be coming over regardless to see what's up with her. And she proceeds to point out the very obvious problem that she can't really, go inside. She can't really go and deal with it. She can't really go and deal with it because obviously it's a big problem for her to deal with, and nobody's listening to her to get out. And of course, but Jim unreluctantly has to hang up on her, pointing out that he's still dealing with Toby and the whole situation of him becoming a knowledge god. So he hangs up on her, tells her that he's sorry, but also points out that he knows she'll be able to handle it by herself. At which point he hangs up on her, much to her frustration, because obviously it's a big party and she can't handle it by herself. But and of course, frustrated, she proceeds to go up to her room to kind of brainstorm some things, only to discover that two Quagglebumps have showed up in her bedroom, and have used blizzard magic to create a snowman in her room, which of course frustrates her, while the Quagglebumps don't really seem to understand what they did wrong and wonder if blizzard magic was not okay. And of course she proceeds to let out a scream, and it's at this point where Not Enrique just kind of hears this and realizes that it seems that he noticed that his big sis seems to be frustrated. At which point he then proceeds to see the two of them, as she's trying to figure out how to get rid of the Quagglebumps and how to get the snowman out of her room, after wearing them out with her primal scream of rage. She doesn't note that Mary and Darcy are at her house, and sure enough, they came to check up on her despite her repeatedly telling them not to. And of course, the thing they immediately notice is the whole party and how it's going completely off the rails. And of course, she immediately insists that she immediately comes down to greet them and tells them, and of course they're frustrated, obviously, because of the whole party situation and how they weren't obviously invited to the party. And of course they're frustrated with Claire because she didn't let them in. And Claire's insistent that they don't come in. Continues to insist that they don't come in, and that's just a little party and that's not really a big deal. But of course they then hear some of the people partying inside, and while they don't know that it's trolls, they conclude that it is they're the next likely suspect, college kids. And they conclude that she has upperclassmen in her house, and then Mary pretty much begs to come into the house to meet them, but also demands to know why she's not letting them party with upperclassmen. And of course, Claire points out that it's not a party and that it's not really a party, and that they need to leave. But of course, Mary, at which point, just becomes so frustrated with Claire that she points out that she's going into the party no matter what, and tries to go in through the front door, which of course Claire blocks her. And when they find out that that she can't get in and out through the back, that they can't get out through any of the ground floors, they decide to climb up on her house to get inside her bedroom. And of course Darcy adding that it's her own fault for not letting them into in and celebrate the party. And of course Claire insists that there's no party and that they need to get off of her house. At which point she immediately runs inside and proceeds to tell Nanariki the situation about how how everybody has just arrived at her house, and that they need to figure out a way to deal with it. And of course she points out that she tells Nanariki that they need to get the party under control, because obviously Darcy and Mary are here and it's a problem now. And of course he insists that he's not really going to deal with he realizes now that it's obviously a problem, she's obviously very visibly upset. But then she also proceeds to insist at Arg that what he's currently headbutting people with it's kind of a rage, or it's kind of a party frat house thing. And Arg points out that he's sorry and that he's trying to, then he's not going to, he realizes he's not being very helpful. At which point she goes upstairs to try and find Mary and Darcy to get them to not come into the house. And of course, meanwhile, Jim is currently still trying to deal with Toby and the whole knowledge god situation. And Toby has, of course, absorbed a lot of knowledge at this point. He's gotten a little bit crazy and is trying to suck knowledge into himself and suck more knowledge, and continues to suck it into himself. And of course, Jim just proceeds to ask Toby if he's found ask Toby if they found the knowledge at this point, because obviously Toby sucked up a lot of knowledge at this point, and they points out that he probably knows something that could help them at this point. And of course, Toby is only really half lucid, constantly spouting out various bits of Trollhunter knowledge, which is great for lore purposes, but also not very helpful for what Jim is trying to do, which is to find a way to get the ring off Strickler's finger. And of course, Jim eventually tells Toby to focus and points out that they need to figure out a way to deal with the whole situation with the Infernocopula. At which point Toby then proceeds to insist that he's going to in order to get the Infernocopula, they need to find the Kairos, and that of course causes Jim to become happy and wonders where the Kairos is. This is this point where Toby points out that the Kairos is in the hands of is in the possession of Gato, which of course causes Jim to become upset, because obviously he points out that Toby is on Gato's shit list. So for that reason, they can't really just go into his keep again. But of course, it's at this point where Toby is once again kind of just snaps out of his lucidity and just continues to absorb more knowledge and spout off more random lore facts. And continues to suck in more knowledge, eventually concluding that he now knows what the secret of life is. And but of course, as he starts trying to tell people what the secret of life is, and it's a funny gag, but he starts vomiting up some of the knowledge that he ate, and he winds up getting sick to his stomach. And eventually, though he continues to be insistent, he eventually throws up all of the knowledge that he's learned, which is as gross as it sounds. And this of course causes Blinky to finally wake up, and having now gotten his his mandatory sleep time, having successfully taken a nap and gotten the sleep he desperately needed, he then realizes what happened. He concludes that Jim and Toby were using Elixir to kind of speed up the process, but of course Toby eventually vomits up all of his knowledge that he's absorbed into himself. And when Jim and Blinky ask him what 2 + 2 is, he merely responds "awesome sauce," which they take as a sign that he's back to normal. But of course it's at this point where Jim apologizes for essentially wrecking Blinky's entire library. But Blinky insists that it'll probably be fine, and that at the time being they'll have to go to Rotten Gut and see if they can find something to put it all back together. Of course Toby immediately becomes upset, because he realizes that is probably going to be very similar to what happened with the Alex lore. But of course it's at this point where we then cut back to Claire, who has come into her room and discovers, and of course Darcy comments on the fact that the floor is all right because there was previously a snowman in there. She does comment why it's soaking wet in her room, and of course she points, but of course Claire isn't really paying attention because she notes that Mary isn't with her, and then proceeds to go look for her. And sure enough, we find out that Mary is currently talking with a troll and trying to figure out who he is and where he's from and what he's into. And of course the troll tells her that he's from underground, literally, but she believes that means he's some sort of artist, and he asks her what art is, because he obviously doesn't know, but she comes off as being kind of deep. And does point out that he's kind of cute, that he seems like he's kind of cute, but it's this point where Claire comes in and scoops Mary up and tells her that it's time that they need to leave right now. Although Mary is insistent that she wants to continue to flirt with the cute art guy that she met, but what we find out is that the guy can light himself up, essentially he can light himself up and light up the runes on his body, and that Mary was dangerously close to discovering that he was a troll. But they then proceed to bring her into the room where Mary once again comments on how it's been a little bit about how it's been shampooed recently, and says that they need to leave. But of course, the two of them insist on if it's something about what's going on with Jim, and they do point out that she's been a lot more distant lately since she and Jim have been hanging out a lot more, and does of course point out that's obviously a problem because they're wondering if they're still best friends, but Claire insists that they are, but also points out that there's a whole entire world that they don't really know about that she's trying to keep secret from them. And they wrongfully conclude that what she's talking about is that she secretly has a college boyfriend to spare Jim's feelings, which and Claire doesn't really tell them that they're wrong, but of course they pull her into a fierce hug and do tell her that they'll happily keep her secret if it means that much to her. But it's at this point where Mary concludes that she absolutely wants to meet this new side guy that she's been dating. Although Claire very much insists that they stay in the room and don't leave. But it's at this point where they hear somebody calling the police. They hear police. They see flashing lights. They see flashing red and blue lights. And they hear a familiar sounding voice. I should mention that. But they hear a familiar sounding voice telling them that they've got them surrounded, and that they know they're having a party, but that they need to either leave or come quietly. And it's at this point where pretty much every troll in the house just kind of bolts. They just climb out of the windows, they burst through the back door, and pretty much that's it. Everybody just leaves in a panic fashion. And of course, she insists that they go out her bedroom. Insists that Darcy and Mary go out her bedroom window, and they wonder if she'll be all right. And she points out that's fine, that she'll take the rap for it, and that her parents will be mad at her, but it'll be fine. And she just escorts them out of the house. At which point, she goes to confront the person on the other side of the front door, only to discover that there was no police in the first place. As we find out, I'm not even gay. Essentially tricked everybody into thinking the police was there and that for breaking up and was there to break up their party. Well, in actuality, all he did was he took their boombox, plugged a microphone into it, and strung up a bunch of red and blue Christmas lights to make it look like it was police officers outside. And of course he tells Claire that she's under arrest, quote unquote, for falling for that. At which point she pulls him into a fierce hug and does point out that was a very brilliant way to break up the party. And they obviously they've reconciled a little bit, because obviously he's since learned that the party has gotten a little too out of hand and caused Claire a lot of stress. So he decided to break it up at that point for her. And of course, he insists that it's fine, and that he didn't mean what he said about not letting her see her brother again, and of course they make up, and she tells him that she's sorry for picking him up by the scruff all the time, but then concludes that with the party now gone, that she's going to have a lot of cleaning up to do, which of course causes her to become upset. But he does point out that it was a joke, and insists that once again he not pick her up by the scruff, but does tell her that she should probably go to bed, and that he'll take care of the entire cleaning up situation. That he'll deal with it. He'll just clean up for her so that she doesn't have to. And of course, before she proceeds to go to bed, he then proceeds to tell her that obviously that from what he's heard, because he's never had any actual siblings of his own, that siblings argue pretty much all the time, and points out that that's most likely what makes them family. And of course, she concludes that must mean that they are indeed family if they argue as much as they do. At which point, she wishes him a good night, and Enrique starts cleaning up all the mess he made because of his party. At which point she walks past the broken picture of her and the real Enrique hanging from the wall, and she hangs it up before going to bed. And that's kind of where the episode ends. So, first and foremost, this episode is just full of various nuggets of information about the various troll hunters that have been before Jim came along. And of course, it is just that's just what obviously Toby, with his ability to absorb troll hunter knowledge, he just spouts off various bits of lore that aren't, and just kind of exposition dumps a bunch of things that aren't really important to the plot of the story, but they are just little bits of nuggets of information that we learn, which is fun as an idea for the episode. And eventually we do find out about the Chirossect, which is going to be their goal for the next episode. But more importantly, this episode results in Claire and not Enrique becoming closer as quote-unquote siblings. And obviously, they fight a lot, but as they conclude, that's what makes them family. So they point out that it's not that big a deal. But yeah, this is very much a character-driven episode, because obviously the thing that comes up about how to further the plot doesn't come up till the very end. But it's a fun episode, and I enjoyed it. But also, more to the point, this episode is also establishes that Claire has not been talking with her friends all that much. But also, this episode concludes that Claire has not been talking with her friends all that much and has been trying to keep up appearances. But obviously, they're frustrated that she hasn't been hanging out with them as much. And of course, Darcy and Mary both expressed that point to her, pointing out that obviously they never get to see her. She's always hanging out with Jim, and conclude that they're always hanging out with her boyfriend. And she also concludes that they haven't officially become boyfriend and girlfriend yet. Obviously, they're getting there, but obviously, they're not officially boyfriend and girlfriend. They are not officially, at least. They're getting there, but not officially yet. But of course, this episode just can confirm a couple of things as well. Obviously, Claire's been spending a lot of time with Jim, and that hasn't been fair to her friends. But also, that Claire has been taking the rap for a lot of the crap Enrique pulls on a daily basis. And that has been a problem. So, there's a couple of things that come up in this episode, but it is a fun episode and it's interesting. And I like the whole idea of the Alex lore and just Toby vomiting up various bits of knowledge. It's funny. It's very funny, and it's a very funny bit. I do kind of like that a lot about this episode. But yeah, in any case, that is gonna do it for this episode of Trollhunters. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And also be sure to check out my Twitch. Link is down in the description as well. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. Please go check that out. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Where the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!